Morning, my wonderful brothers and sisters in Messiah Yeshua. This is an amazing, amazing day for many reasons. So I'm just going to get right into it. Do you all know where the Passover story really begins? It begins in the Garden of Eden. God and man had a true relationship with one another, a relationship of pure love. When Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they broke that covenant bond with God, the Father. This caused their spirits to die and be cut off from the Lord. It was here in Genesis 3:21 that the Lord initiated the first blood sacrifice as the only way to atone for sin. It says, the Lord made for Adam and Eve tunics of skins and clothed them. This clearly indicates that the Lord killed animals for their skins to make these garments. From then on, it was clear the only way to have any kind of relationship with the Lord was through an atonement sacrifice, aka the sacrificial system which was set up when the temple was built. All of the old covenant stories about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or Israel, lead back to the same message from God to the world. To Israel first, because they were the first to acknowledge him as God, and then to the nations of the world. The only way back to a right, pure, and holy relationship with God is through blood atonement. For God says, the life is in the blood. How fitting that the Israelites crossed over something called the Red Sea. So the story of Passover, which is the ultimate example in the Old Testament, although there are many, of redemption from slavery, but ultimately from the slavery of sin, it is commanded by God to all of Israel to be commemorated every year eternally. Why did he do this? Even in the New Testament, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, 7 and 8, for indeed, Yeshua, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast, not with the old leaven. In other words, the understanding of the Passover from the temporary, natural perspective, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Now, as you know, leavening in the Old Testament always represented sin, even though the reason for it will become clear. In other words, not in a legalistic way. He did not want us to be legalistic about it, which is the way the non-Messianic Jews have kept it for the last 2,000 years. The average Jew, Reformed or even conservative, they don't take it seriously. But instead, with the grace to see that God's plan all along was for the Jews and the Gentiles, the nations, to identify the prophetic significance of the Passover story regarding his Messiah, so that once he came in the flesh and died for our sins, they would have the veils come off and they would realize who he was and accept his once-for-all sacrifice for the sins of all mankind, Jew and Gentile. The Jews whose eyes were opened at that time were the apostles and all the disciples, the followers of Messiah from that point on. But in time, the enemy was allowed to put a veil over the majority of Israel's eyes to keep them from recognizing him who was pierced for our transgressions. This led to the gospel being preached to all other nations for the past 2,000 years. The Passover Seder, until this day, has all the truths of Messiah written all over it and is in all the traditions of the Seder. There are 4 cups of wine that represent specific things. The 3rd cup of wine at the Seder is blessed and called the cup of redemption. This was supposed to represent God redeeming Israel from Egypt and slavery. This was also, by the way, the cup that Yeshua said to the disciples at his last earthly Seder. They should drink it in memory of him, because he is the symbol of the blood. It is the symbol of the blood he will shed on the cross. The blood of atonement once and for all. And the matzah, which is called the afikomen, he said, from now on, eat it and remember it has my sinless, unleavened body, which was broken and killed for all mankind. If anybody has ever seen matzah, you'll see that it's pierced and striped, just like the Lord. For all those, both natural Israel and those of all the other nations on earth who accept him and become grafted in, this remarkable sacrifice that God made of himself for us in order to bring our spirits back to life to him is miraculous. Nothing but miraculous. The tradition of the 3rd cup of wine and the eating of the matzah in the Passover Seder was meant to represent what happened to Israel in their freedom from Egypt in the natural. But it was truly meant by God to show the Jewish people and say, hello, McFly, anybody in there? Seriously, that's what he was doing in all the holidays in Judaism. So he was hoping they would see its symbolic significance of Yeshua's work on the cross for when it actually happened in the natural. For them, it was the next day, and they saw it. When Paul began his ministry to the nations of the whole world, because that's where he was called to, not to the Jews, but to the other nations of the world, that was 14 years later, and it was agreed by the believers at that time that the nations, the Gentile believers, did not have to keep Jewish holidays to be considered believers, which is great and fine and freeing. They began a tradition of taking communion at various times to remember what the Lord said. So, however, for 2,000 years, the Jewish people have kept the Passover. The Lord still uses it to try and open the eyes of all Israel, because very, very soon, sooner than anybody thinks, many will finally see it and come to believe in the truth of Messiah. And the whole body is called to help open the eyes of the Jewish people, especially in the end days. Yeshua says he will not return until many of the Jewish people say about him, Baruch haba b'Shem Adonai, blessed be the name of the Lord, Messiah Yeshua. That means it is now time, if we truly are in the end of days, to pray and speak to our Jewish brethren, as well as all those that don't know him, about the truth of the Passover Seder, and open their eyes. And one last thing. The day that he rose from the dead, today, Resurrection Sunday, don't know if all of you know this, but it is also one of the 7 holy feasts in the book of Leviticus, and it is called the Feast of First Fruits. How fitting. Yeshua, the first fruits of the resurrection of mankind, rises from the dead on the biblical holiday of first fruits. And with that, I say Hag Sameach, Azisen Pesach, Happy Passover, and happy Resurrection Sunday.